The wind came first, then the snow, then the screaming silence that meant her husband and son were dead. Margot Mitchell pressed her frozen hands against her face as dawn broke over the Kansas prairie, revealing what the blizzard had stolen in the darkness while she huddled beneath the wagon bed with only a torn blanket and her grief. She was 22 years old, 300 miles from anywhere that mattered, and the cold had taken everything except the tears that now froze on her cheeks before they could fall. The wagon stood crooked in a snowdrift, one wheel shattered, the canvas top ripped away by winds that had screamed like demons through the January night. Her husband James lay 30 yards away where he had gone to find the horses, his body already covered by fresh powder. Their son Samuel, only 4 years old, had stopped breathing in her arms sometime before midnight, his small lungs too weak to fight the freezing air. She had sung to him until the end, old hymns her mother taught her in Ohio, back when the world made sense and winter meant warm fires and family gathered close. Now there was nothing. The supplies were scattered or buried. The horses were gone, probably dead in some ravine. The other wagons in their small group had pushed ahead 2 days earlier when James insisted on stopping to repair the axle. They would be in Linden by now, she thought distantly, settling into whatever new lives waited there. They would not come back to look for stragglers, not in this weather. That was the way of things out here. You kept moving or you died. Margot pulled herself from beneath the wagon, her legs numb, her skirts stiff with ice. She needed to bury them properly. She needed to say words over their bodies. She needed to do 1,000 things that her frozen hands and broken heart could not manage. Instead, she stood swaying in the knee-deep snow, watching her breath make small clouds in the bitter air, wondering if she should just lie down beside them and let the prairie take her too. That was when she heard the horse. The sound came from the east, a single animal moving through heavy snow. Margot turned slowly, her vision blurred by tears and exhaustion. A rider emerged from behind a low rise, his hat pulled low, his coat crusted white. He sat tall in the saddle despite the conditions, and even from a distance, she could see him scanning the wreckage of her wagon with the careful attention of someone who understood trouble when he saw it. He rode closer, and she saw he was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind despite his youth. His eyes were gray like the winter sky, and when he looked at James's body, then at the wagon, then at her standing there with nothing left to lose, something shifted in his expression that might have been recognition of shared pain. "Madam." He touched his hat brim, his voice rough from cold. "Name's Thomas Monroe. I have a ranch about 8 miles south. Saw smoke yesterday, thought someone might be in trouble." There was no smoke. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat and distant. "No, madam, but I came anyway." He dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. Up close, she could see he was solid, capable, the kind of man the frontier shaped into something harder than the soft boys back east. "How many?" "My husband. My son." The words came out without emotion because there was no emotion left in her, just a vast emptiness where her life used to be. The blizzard took them. Thomas nodded once, quick and decisive. He looked toward the sun, calculating something. "We need to move. Another storm's coming tonight. I can see it in the clouds." He walked to James's body, knelt beside it, checked for signs of life even though they both knew there were none. Then he moved to the wagon, looking inside, assessing what remained. "I cannot leave them here." Margot heard herself say the words as if from a great distance. "No, madam." "But we cannot bury them proper in frozen ground. We will take them back to my ranch, put them in the barn until the thaw. Then we will do right by them." He was already moving, taking action, making decisions. Part of her wanted to argue, to insist on something, but the larger part recognized that she had no strength left for insisting on anything. Thomas wrapped James in a canvas tarp from his saddlebag, then came back to the wagon. The boy, inside. She could not bring herself to say more. He found Samuel wrapped in her best shawl, his small face peaceful as if sleeping. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he handled the child with such care that something cracked in Margot's chest, a small break in the ice that surrounded her heart. He wrapped Samuel in his own coat, cradling him like something precious, and secured him carefully to the saddle. "Can you ride?" "I do not know." "We will find out." He helped her onto the horse, his hands strong and steady, then secured James's body behind the saddle. When everything was arranged, he took the reins and began walking, leading the horse south through the snow. They moved in silence through the white landscape. Margot clung to the saddle horn, her body swaying with the horse's movement, her mind empty of everything except the simple act of holding on. The wind picked up as they traveled, and she could see Thomas was right about the storm. Dark clouds gathered in the west, and the temperature dropped further as the sun climbed higher without warmth. The ranch appeared after what felt like both hours and minutes. A low house built of sod and timber with a barn behind it and several outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Margot felt the first flicker of something other than grief when she saw it. Not hope exactly, but the recognition that warmth still existed somewhere in the world. Thomas led the horse to the barn first. He lifted Samuel down with infinite care, then James, carrying them both inside to a clean, dry corner where he laid them gently on fresh hay. Margot slid from the saddle on her own, nearly falling when her legs buckled, but she caught herself on the barn wall and followed him inside. "I will build coffins tomorrow if the storm holds off," Thomas said quietly. "They will rest here safe until spring." Margot knelt beside her son, touching his cold cheek one last time. He was going to be a doctor. He was so smart, always asking questions about everything. James said he would send him to a real school back east when he was older. I am sure he was remarkable. Thomas stepped back, giving her space. "Take whatever time you need. I will be at the house." She stayed until the light began to fade, until her tears were spent and her body shook with cold and exhaustion. When she finally walked to the house, she found Thomas had a fire blazing in the hearth and coffee heating on the stove. The interior was simple but clean, one main room with a kitchen area, a table and chairs, a bed in the corner. A door led to what looked like a smaller bedroom. "You take the bed," Thomas said, not looking at her. "I will sleep in the chair. I cannot take your bed. You can and you will. You are half frozen and in shock." He poured coffee into a tin cup and pressed it into her hands. "Drink this. Then I will heat some stew. You need food." Margot wanted to refuse, to insist she needed nothing, but her body betrayed her by accepting the coffee and drinking it gratefully. The warmth spread through her chest, painful in its intensity. Thomas moved around the small kitchen with efficient competence, heating leftover venison stew, slicing bread, setting out butter he kept in a cold box outside. "Why did you come looking?" she asked finally. "You said you saw smoke, but there was no smoke." He was quiet for a moment, stirring the stew. "I lost my wife 2 years ago, childbirth. The baby too. I know what it looks like when someone has that kind of emptiness in their eyes." He ladled stew into bowls, set them on the table. "I saw that look on my own face every time I looked in a mirror for 6 months after. So when I thought I saw smoke yesterday morning, I decided to ride out, even though I probably imagined it. Sometimes you just know when someone needs help." They ate in silence. Margot managed half the bowl before her stomach rebelled, but it was more than she had eaten in 2 days. Thomas did not comment, Just cleared the dishes and banked the fire while she sat at the table, too tired to move. "The bed is ready whenever you want it," he said. "There are clean blankets, and I put a hot stone wrapped in cloth at the foot to warm it up." She nodded, standing on shaking legs. At the bed she hesitated, still wearing her frozen dress, her ruined boots. Thomas had turned away, busying himself with something at the stove, giving her privacy. She managed to remove her boots and the worst of the wet outer layers before crawling beneath the blankets, and the warmth of the stone at her feet made her gasp. Sleep took her instantly. A black void without dreams. She woke sometime in the night to the sound of wind howling around the house. The storm had arrived. She could hear Thomas adding wood to the fire, his movements quiet and careful. In the firelight she saw him settle into the chair with a blanket, his tall frame clearly uncomfortable but his face peaceful. He had saved her life. The thought came to her clearly in the darkness. If he had not found her, she would be dead in the snow beside her wagon by morning. The knowledge should have comforted her, but instead it made her feel guilty. What right did she have to live when Samuel and James were dead? She must have made some sound because Thomas's voice came soft from the chair. "Try to sleep. Tomorrow will be hard enough without adding tired to it. Why are you being kind to me?" "Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it." He shifted in the chair. "A neighbor woman came by every day for 3 months after Sarah died. Brought food, made sure I ate it, sat with me while I cried. Never asked for anything, never expected thanks. Just showed up because it was what needed doing. I figure this is what needs doing now." Margot closed her eyes, letting his words settle over her. The wind screamed outside, but inside the small house it was warm and dry and safe. It was more than she deserved, but she was too exhausted to refuse it. The storm lasted 3 days. Thomas kept the fire going, cooked simple meals, and gave Margot space to grieve. On the second day, she managed to help with small tasks, washing dishes, sweeping the floor, anything to keep her hands busy. On the third day, when the wind finally died and the sun emerged pale and cold, she helped him dig through the snow to reach the barn. Inside, Thomas showed her his small herd of cattle, 12 head that he kept close during winter. He had 2 horses in addition to the one he rode, both sturdy ranch animals built for hard work. He also had chickens in a protected coop, and Margot found herself gathering eggs while he mucked stalls, the simple farm work almost meditative in its familiarity. "Where were you headed?" Thomas asked as they worked. "Linden. James had a job waiting there, working for a freight company. We were going to have a real house, send Samuel to school." She set eggs carefully in the basket. "We left Ohio in September, traveled with a wagon train until we hit Kansas. Then James thought he could save time cutting across country. The wagon master told him it was foolish so late in the season, but James was stubborn. Most men out here are." Thomas leaned on his shovel. "Sorry, I did not mean to speak ill. It is true, though." He was stubborn and proud and certain he knew best. She felt tears threaten again. "And I loved him anyway. We were married for years. I was 18 when we wed, he was 23. He worked in his father's store, but he wanted more. He wanted adventure and opportunity, all those things the frontier promised." "Did you want those things too?" Margot considered the question. "I wanted James to be happy. I wanted Samuel to grow up strong and healthy. I wanted a home, wherever that might be. I suppose I was too young to know what I really wanted beyond that." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I met Sarah at a church social in Missouri. She was 17. I was 22. We got married and came out here to Kansas in 1876, filed a homestead claim. Built this place with our own hands, spent 2 years breaking sod and fighting drought. She was tough, tougher than me in some ways. When she got pregnant, we were so happy." His voice roughened. "Then everything went wrong during the birth. The midwife did what she could, but it was not enough. I lost them both in one night. I am sorry." "Me too." He picked up his shovel again. "But we keep going, right? Because that is what the ones we loved would want. They would want us to keep going." They finished the barn work in companionable silence. Back in the house, Thomas built up the fire while Margot made coffee, a routine they had fallen into without discussion. It felt strange to be in this domestic space with a man who was not her husband, but nothing about her life felt normal anymore, so she let the strangeness wash over her without resistance. That evening, Thomas brought out rough lumber from a shed and began building coffins by lamplight. Margot sat at the table, watching his hands work, the careful way he measured and cut and joined the wood. He was a man who knew how to build things, how to create something from nothing. She wondered what that must feel like, to have that kind of capability. "Tell me about your ranch," she said after a while. "How did you come to be here?" "Filed a homestead claim like I said. Proved up on it after 5 years, got the deed. Added cattle as I could afford them, built the barn, improved the house. It is not much, but it is mine." He sanded a board smooth, checking the grain. "I run about 30 head usually, sell them in Linden every fall, keep enough back to maintain the herd, grow some corn and wheat in the summer, enough to get by. It is a living barely, but it is honest work. Do you ever get lonely?" "Every day." He said it without self-pity, just fact. But lonely is better than dead, and those seemed like the only two choices after Sarah died, so I chose lonely. Margot understood exactly what he meant. "What will I do now? I have no husband, no son, no wagon, no supplies. I have nothing." Thomas looked up from his work, meeting her eyes directly. "You will stay here until you are strong enough to decide what comes next. Maybe that is a week, maybe that is a month. When you are ready, I will take you to Linden if that is where you want to go. Or I will help you get passage back east if you want to return to Ohio. Or maybe you will want something else entirely, but you do not have to decide tonight. I cannot just live here indefinitely. It would not be proper." "Proper." He almost smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Mrs. Mitchell, you survived a blizzard that killed your family. You walked through hell and came out the other side. I do not think anyone is going to worry much about proper, and if they do, that is their problem, not ours." She wanted to argue, but he was right. The old rules from Ohio seemed ridiculous out here on the frontier, where survival mattered more than reputation. Besides, she was too tired to care what anyone thought. The coffins took 3 days to complete. Thomas worked on them each evening after the daily ranch chores, making them as fine as he could with the materials available. He lined the interiors with clean cloth and fitted the lids with careful precision. When they were done, he and Margot together placed Samuel and James inside, and Thomas nailed the lids shut with quiet reverence. "The ground is still too frozen," Thomas said. "But in a few weeks, when the thaw comes, we will bury them proper. There is a small cemetery about 2 miles from here where Sarah is buried. They can rest there." Margot touched the top of Samuel's coffin, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. "Thank you for doing this. You did not have to be so kind." "Yes, I did." Thomas covered the coffins with canvas. "Because that is what people should do for each other, especially out here where everything is hard and cruel enough already." The weeks passed slowly. January turned to February, the bitter cold easing slightly, though snow still covered the ground. Margot fell into the rhythms of ranch life, helping with chores, cooking meals, maintaining the house. Thomas showed her how to milk the cow he kept, how to feed the chickens properly, how to mend tack and handle the horses. She learned quickly, her hands remembering the farm work from her childhood in Ohio. They talked in the evenings, sharing stories of their lives before loss reshaped them. Margot told him about growing up with 3 sisters, about her father's small farm, about the church socials and quilting bees that filled her youth. Thomas told her about his childhood in Missouri, his father who died when he was 12, his mother who remarried and moved to California. They talked about books they had read, songs they remembered, dreams they once held. Slowly, carefully, something shifted between them. It started as simple companionship, 2 lonely people finding comfort in shared space. But as the weeks progressed, Margot began to notice things. The way Thomas smiled when she made a joke, rare but genuine. The way he always made sure she had the warmest seat by the fire. The way his eyes followed her when she moved around the room, not with hunger but with something softer, something like wonder that she was there at all. And she noticed things about herself too. The way her heart lifted when she heard him coming in from the barn. The way she took extra care with her appearance, pinning her hair more carefully, wearing the one dress that was not completely worn out. The way she found excuses to stand near him, to brush against his shoulder when reaching for something, to let their hands touch when passing dishes at the table. It felt wrong to have these feelings so soon after losing James. Guilt gnawed at her constantly. What kind of wife was she, to look at another man with interest mere weeks after her husband's death? What kind of mother, to laugh at Thomas's stories when her son was dead in the barn? But the heart, she was learning, followed its own logic. And Thomas made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before the blizzard. More than that, he made her feel seen. James had loved her, she did not doubt that, but he had loved the idea of her more than the reality. He had wanted a wife who would follow without question, who would smile and agree and make his life comfortable. Thomas wanted something different. He wanted a partner, someone who would work beside him, who would challenge him when necessary, who would build a life with him rather than for him. One evening in late February, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Thomas spoke carefully. "The ground is starting to thaw. Another week, maybe 2, and we can dig proper graves." Margot nodded, her throat tight. "I have been thinking about what you said about deciding what comes next. Have you come to any conclusions? I do not want to go back to Ohio. There is nothing for me there except pity and questions I cannot answer, and I do not want to go to Linden alone." She twisted her hands in her lap. "But I also know I cannot stay here indefinitely. People will talk, and that talk will harm your reputation." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "What if you stayed as my wife?" The words hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible and exactly what her heart wanted. Margot felt her breath catch. "Thomas, we barely know each other. We know enough." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes steady. "I know you are strong and capable and kind even in your grief. I know you work hard and do not complain. I know you understand loss and know how to keep going anyway. And I know that I have been less lonely these past weeks than I have been in 2 years. He paused, then continued quietly. "I also know it is too soon, and you are still grieving, and maybe I am a fool for even suggesting it. But out here, practical matters as much as passion. I need help running this ranch. You need a home and security. We could start with that foundation and see what grows from it." Margot's heart hammered in her chest. "And what if nothing grows? What if we are just 2 lonely people making a mistake?" "Then we will be 2 lonely people who at least have company in their mistake." He managed a small smile. "But I do not think it would be a mistake. I think we could make a good life together, Margot. Not the same as what we had before, but something new. Something that honors what we lost while still letting us live." She thought about it, turning the idea over in her mind like a stone smoothed by river water. It was fast, too fast by any proper measure. She had known Thomas only 6 weeks. She was still grieving her husband and son. Everything about this was wrong by conventional standards, but nothing about her life was conventional anymore. The blizzard had destroyed that along with everything else, and Thomas was right about the practical aspects. She needed a home. He needed help. They enjoyed each other's company, respected each other, were beginning to care for each other. Maybe that was enough to build on. If I said yes, she spoke slowly, testing the words, it would not be because I do not still love James. I will always love him. I know that. Just like I will always love Sarah, but dead does not mean we have to stop living. Thomas reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused. We deserve to keep living, Margot, both of us. She looked at their joined hands, at the way his fingers wrapped around hers with gentle strength. Then yes, I will marry you. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. Truly, truly. Though I think we should wait until after the burial, after we have said proper goodbye to James and Samuel. I need that closure first. Of course. He squeezed her hand, then released it, and she felt the loss of his touch immediately. We will do this right, Margot. I promise you that. The thaw came gradually, the snow melting into mud, the frozen ground softening enough to dig. On a clear morning in mid-March, Thomas and Margot carried the coffins to the small cemetery where Sarah Monroe rested beneath a simple wooden cross. Thomas had dug 2 graves beside Sarah's, and as they lowered the coffins into the earth, Margot finally let herself fully grieve. She cried for James, for his stubbornness and dreams and the love they had shared. She cried for Samuel, for the boy he was and the man he would never become. She cried for the life she had planned, and the woman she had been before the blizzard changed everything. Thomas stood beside her, solid and steady, and when her legs gave out, he caught her, holding her up while she sobbed against his chest. I am sorry, she gasped when the storm of tears finally passed. I am so sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. He kept his arms around her, a bulwark against grief. You loved them, and love does not stop just because someone is gone. Take all the time you need. They stood there until Margot could breathe again, until the worst of the pain receded to something bearable. Then together, they filled the graves, packing earth over the coffins until 2 fresh mounds rose beside Sarah's resting place. Thomas had made wooden crosses marked with names and dates, and he placed them at the heads of the graves with careful precision. You want to say anything? He asked quietly. Margot looked at the crosses, at the names carved there. James Mitchell, devoted husband and father. Samuel Mitchell, beloved son. The words were inadequate to capture who they had been, but words always were. Thank you for loving me, she said finally. Thank you for giving me Samuel, even though I did not get to keep him. Thank you for the good years we had. I will carry you both with me always, but I will keep living. I have to keep living. I hope you understand. Thomas added his own prayer, simple words about rest and peace and the mercy of God. Then they stood together in silence, honoring the dead while the living wind moved through the prairie grass around them. When they walked back to the ranch house, Margot felt lighter somehow, as if saying goodbye had lifted a weight she did not know she was carrying. When should we go to town? She asked. Tomorrow, if you are ready. We need to see the preacher anyway. They rode to Linden the next morning, both mounted on Thomas's horses, the 8-mile journey taking them across open prairie and past scattered homesteads. Linden was a small town, barely more than a wide spot in the trail, with a general store, a church, a blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses clustered around the single main street. Thomas led them to the church, a simple white building with a steeple that looked too large for the structure beneath it. The preacher was a man named Reverend Caldwell, gray-haired and kind-eyed, who welcomed them into his small office behind the sanctuary. Thomas explained the situation simply, without embellishment. The blizzard, the deaths, Margot's rescue, their decision to marry. Reverend Caldwell listened carefully, his gaze moving between them, assessing. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have my deepest condolences for your losses," he said finally. "And I appreciate your honesty about the circumstances. But I must ask, are you certain this is what you want? Grief can cloud judgment, and decisions made in the immediate aftermath of tragedy are not always wise." Margot met his eyes steadily. "I am certain, Reverend. I understand this is quick by conventional standards, but nothing about life on the frontier is conventional. Thomas saved my life and treated me with respect and kindness when I had nothing. He is a good man, and I believe we can build a good life together. And you, Thomas, you are still young. There will be other opportunities for marriage, perhaps with someone whose heart is not so recently broken." "I want to marry Margot," Thomas said firmly. "Not someone else, not someday in the future. Her now, for all the reasons she said, and a dozen more I could name if needed." Reverend Caldwell studied them a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Very well. I will post the banns this Sunday. If there are no objections, we can perform the ceremony in 3 weeks. 3 weeks gave them time to prepare. Thomas took Margot to the general store where they used precious cash to buy fabric for a new dress. Simple but clean. The storekeeper's wife, a bustling woman named Mrs. Patterson, took Margot's measurements and promised to sew the dress herself, clearly delighted by the prospect of a wedding. "We do not get many happy events out here," Mrs. Patterson said as she pinned the fabric. "Mostly we just survive. So when there is something to celebrate, we celebrate properly. You will have a nice wedding, Mrs. Mitchell, mark my words." Word spread through the small community quickly. Thomas was known and respected, a quiet man who kept to himself but always paid his debts and helped neighbors when they needed it. The story of how he found Margot and took her in was told with approval, and if anyone thought the marriage too hasty, they kept it to themselves. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Thomas cleaned the house thoroughly, made repairs to the barn, bought a new team of horses at a good price from a homesteader heading back east. Margot sewed curtains for the windows, planted an early garden, and slowly transformed the bachelor dwelling into a home. They also talked, long conversations about what their marriage would be. Thomas made clear he had no expectations for the wedding night or any night thereafter until Margot was ready. "We will let things develop naturally," he said. "No pressure, no demands. When you are ready, you will let me know, and until then we are just 2 people sharing space and chores." Margot appreciated his sensitivity, though she also felt a growing attraction to him that surprised her with its strength. Sometimes when he came in from working outside, his shirt damp with sweat, his hair falling across his forehead, she felt a pull low in her belly that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with desire. She was not ready to act on that desire yet, still too raw from her losses, but knowing it existed gave her hope for their future. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in early April. The small church was packed with townspeople and neighboring ranchers, all dressed in their Sunday best. Margot wore her new dress, simple blue calico with white lace at the collar, and carried a bouquet of early prairie flowers that Mrs. Patterson had gathered that morning. Thomas wore a suit borrowed from Reverend Caldwell, a bit tight in the shoulders but respectable. They stood before the congregation and spoke their vows, their voices steady. Thomas promised to honor and cherish her, to provide for her, to stand beside her through whatever challenges came. Margot promised the same, adding her own silent promise to try to love him as he deserved, to build a life worthy of his kindness. When Reverend Caldwell pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her gently, his lips soft and careful. The congregation applauded, and Mrs. Patterson pulled out a cake she had baked in secret, white cake with honey frosting. And suddenly, there was a celebration happening, music and dancing and laughter filling the small church. Margot danced with Thomas, his hand warm at her waist, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a large man. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as they swayed to fiddle music. "I am better than all right." She smiled up at him and realized she meant it. "I am happy, Thomas. I did not think I would ever feel happy again, but I do." His eyes went soft. "Good. You deserve to be happy, Margot Monroe, Margot Monroe. Her new name, her new life." It felt strange and right all at once, like putting on a coat that did not quite fit but would reshape itself to her body with wear. They stayed at the celebration until evening, then rode home through the spring twilight, the prairie alive with new grass and wildflowers. At the ranch house, Thomas helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Inside, he had prepared the small bedroom for her, fresh sheets on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the small table. "This is yours," he said, "for as long as you want it. I will sleep in the main room." Margot looked at the room, at the care he had taken, and made a decision. "Thomas, we are married. I do not expect separate rooms indefinitely." He went very still. "Margot, I meant what I said. There is no pressure, I know, and I am not ready for everything yet. But we could share the bed, at least for sleeping. I think I would rest better knowing you were close." She felt her cheeks heat. "Unless you would prefer your own space." "No," the word came out rough. "No, I would like that very much." That night they lay side by side in the narrow bed, not quite touching but aware of every breath, every small movement. Margot felt her heart racing, but it was not fear or obligation driving it. It was anticipation, hope, the beginning of something new growing between them. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for saving my life." Thomas reached over, taking her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me a reason to hope again." They fell asleep holding hands, and when Margot woke in the night, she found herself curled against Thomas's side, his arm around her shoulders, and for the first time since the blizzard, she felt safe. Spring unfolded across the Kansas prairie with determined beauty. The snow melted completely, revealing new grass and wildflowers that turned the landscape into a sea of green and gold and purple. Thomas worked from dawn to dusk preparing fields for planting, repairing winter damage to fences and outbuildings, tending his growing herd of cattle. Margot worked alongside him, learning the rhythms of ranch life, discovering strength in her body she did not know she possessed. They planted corn and wheat, working together to break sod and press seeds into dark earth. Margot's hands blistered, then calloused. Her skin darkened from the sun despite wearing a bonnet. Her body grew leaner and stronger, shaped by physical labor. She was becoming someone new, she realized. Not the soft girl from Ohio who married James, and not the broken woman Thomas found in the snow. Someone else entirely, forged by loss and survival and daily work. In the evenings they cooked together, a companionable dance around the small kitchen. Thomas taught her how to make sourdough bread from his starter, passed down from his mother. Margot taught him how to make the dumplings her grandmother used to make, light and fluffy in chicken broth. They ate at the table, talking about the day's work, making plans for improvements they wanted to make, discussing which cattle to sell and which to keep for breeding. And slowly, carefully, they grew closer. It started with small touches, a hand on a shoulder in passing, fingers brushing when reaching for the same item. Then longer contact, Thomas's arm around her waist as they stood looking at the sunset, Margot's head on his shoulder as they sat by the fire. The physical attraction between them built like summer heat, undeniable and increasingly difficult to ignore. One evening in late May, after a particularly long day of planting, they bathed in sequence using the large tin tub Thomas filled with heated water. Margot went first while Thomas did evening chores, then he took his turn while she prepared dinner. When he emerged from behind the screen where the tub sat, his hair damp, his shirt clinging to his still wet shoulders, Margot felt desire hit her like a physical blow. He caught her staring and stopped, water dripping from his hair. "Margot," she set down the spoon she was holding, her hands trembling slightly. "I think I am ready, if you are, for us to be truly married." Thomas crossed the room slowly, giving her time to change her mind to take back the words. When he reached her, he cupped her face gently in both hands, his gray eyes searching hers. "Are you certain? Because if there is any doubt, we can wait." "I am certain." She covered his hands with hers. "I will always love James and Samuel. That part of my heart is theirs forever. But I have room for more love, Thomas, and I want to love you. I am ready to love you." He kissed her then, not the gentle brush of lips from their wedding, but something deeper, hungry and tender all at once. Margot kissed him back, her arms going around his neck, her body pressed against his. Heat flared between them, 4 months of wanting and waiting suddenly released. Thomas lifted her, carried her to the bed they shared for sleeping, laid her down gently on the quilt. His hands were shaking as he helped her with buttons and laces, his touch reverent as he revealed her skin. Margot helped him with his own clothes, her fingers clumsy with nervousness and desire. When they came together finally, it was not like it had been with James. With James, their lovemaking had been pleasant but predictable, a duty mixed with affection. With Thomas, it was entirely different. He took his time, learning her body, asking what she liked, adjusting to her responses. And she explored him with equal curiosity, discovering that intimacy could be a conversation between two bodies, a give and take that left them both breathless and satisfied. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin damp with sweat despite the evening air, hearts gradually slowing. Margot traced patterns on Thomas's chest, feeling utterly content. "I did not know it could be like that," she admitted softly. "Neither did I." He kissed the top of her head. "Maybe because this is different. We chose each other knowing the worst about life. We chose each other with our eyes open." She tilted her head to look at him. "I do love you, Thomas. I know I have not said it before, but I do. Maybe not the same way I love James, but just as deeply." "I love you too." He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I think I started loving you when you helped me build those coffins without breaking down, when you showed that kind of strength, and I have been falling deeper every day since." They made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss. And when they finally slept, wrapped around each other in the warm spring night, Margot felt at peace for the first time since the blizzard. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made the prairie shimmer like water. They worked early mornings and late evenings, resting during the worst of the midday sun. The crops grew tall and green. The cattle fattened on prairie grass. Thomas hired 2 drifters passing through to help with haying, and Margot cooked for all of them, enormous meals to fuel hard labor. In July, Margot realized she was pregnant. The signs were subtle at first: morning queasiness she tried to ignore, exhaustion that seemed disproportionate to the work. But when she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she knew. She waited until evening to tell Thomas, nervous despite their closeness. They sat on the porch as the sun set, drinking cool water from the well, and she took his hand. "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am with child." Maybe 3 months along, I think. Thomas went very still, his face unreadable. Then slowly a smile broke across his features, joy transforming him. Truly, truly. She found herself smiling back. Are you happy? Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were suddenly fragile. A baby, our baby. God, Margot, I never thought I would get another chance at this. I am terrified, she admitted against his shoulder. What if something goes wrong like it did with Sarah? What if I lose this baby like I lost Samuel? Then we will face it together. He pulled back to look at her. But let us not borrow trouble. Right now, today, we have good news. Let us celebrate that. They did celebrate, with a special dinner and careful lovemaking and plans whispered in the darkness. Thomas became even more protective, insisting Margot rest more, take on lighter chores. She argued but secretly appreciated his care, especially as the pregnancy progressed and her body changed. In August, they traveled to Linden for supplies, and so Margot could see the doctor, an older man named Dr. Harrison, who examined her and pronounced everything healthy. The baby should come in January, he said. Make sure you have someone with you when the time comes. Thomas, you should arrange for a midwife well in advance. I will, Thomas promised. Whatever she needs, whatever keeps them safe. They returned to the ranch laden with supplies, including yarn so Margot could knit baby clothes and soft flannel for nappies. As fall arrived and the crops matured, Margot spent her evenings knitting while Thomas read aloud from books borrowed from Reverend Caldwell. Her belly swelled, the baby moving inside her with increasing vigor. Feel this, she said one evening, taking Thomas's hand and placing it on her stomach. A moment later, the baby kicked hard enough to see the movement through her dress. Thomas's face filled with wonder. That is our child, our son or daughter. His voice went thick with emotion. I cannot believe this is real sometimes. It is real. Margot covered his hand with hers. And this time everything will be all right. I feel it. Harvest came, and despite Margot's protests, Thomas hired help again so she would not overwork herself. They brought in good crops of wheat and corn, enough to sell surplus in town and still have plenty for the livestock through winter. Thomas sold half his herd in October, getting excellent prices, and came home with more money than Margot had seen since leaving Ohio. We are doing well, he told her that night, counting out the money at the kitchen table. Better than I dared hope. Next spring, I want to add on to the house, build a proper room for the baby and maybe another bedroom for us. Make this place more of a home. It already is a home, Margot said, but she was pleased by his plans. But a bit more space would not hurt, especially with a baby coming. Winter arrived gradually, the days shortening, the air turning crisp. By November, Margot was large enough that moving was difficult, but she refused to become an invalid, still cooking and doing light chores despite Thomas's hovering. They prepared for the baby's arrival, setting up a cradle Thomas built in the corner of their bedroom, stacking baby clothes in a chest, making lists of everything they might need. In December, Thomas brought Mrs. Patterson out from town to stay with them, the midwife who would attend the birth. She was a practical woman, experienced and calm, and her presence eased some of Margot's fears. You are healthy and strong, Mrs. Patterson assured her. I have delivered dozens of babies, and I can tell when there is likely to be trouble. You should have a normal birth, God willing. Christmas passed quietly, just the three of them at the ranch. Thomas had bought Margot a beautiful shawl in Linden, soft wool dyed deep blue. She gave him new work gloves she had sewn herself, lined with fur for warmth. Mrs. Patterson received a fruit cake Margot had made and seemed genuinely touched by the gesture. The baby came on a cold January night, almost a year to the day since the blizzard took everything. Margot woke to contractions at midnight, steady and insistent. She woke Thomas, who immediately roused Mrs. Patterson, and then everything became a blur of pain and effort and Thomas holding her hand, while Mrs. Patterson gave calm instructions. Labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Margot lost track of time, focused only on the work of bringing her child into the world. Thomas stayed with her the entire time, his face pale but determined, talking to her constantly, encouraging her, wiping her forehead with cool cloths. "You are doing beautifully," he kept saying. "Just a bit more. You are so strong, Margot, so strong." Finally, as afternoon light slanted through the window, the baby came in a rush of pain and relief. Mrs. Patterson caught the child, cleaned the tiny face, and the most beautiful sound in the world filled the room. The baby's first cry, strong and healthy. "You have a son," Mrs. Patterson announced, her face wreathed in smiles. "A big, healthy boy." She placed the baby on Margot's chest, and Margot looked down at the tiny red face, the dark hair, the perfect fingers and toes. Tears streamed down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Thomas leaned over them both, his own eyes wet. "He is perfect, absolutely perfect." "What will you name him?" Mrs. Patterson asked as she worked to clean up. Margot looked at Thomas, and they shared a moment of silent communication. "James Samuel Monroe," Margot said. "To honor the ones we lost, but to give him his own life too." "James Samuel," Thomas repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect." The baby, whom they would call Jamie to distinguish him from his namesake, nursed strongly and fell asleep in Margot's arms. Mrs. Patterson stayed another week to help with recovery, teaching Margot how to care for the newborn, making sure mother and baby were both healthy. "You did well," she told Margot before leaving. "You are a natural mother. This little one is lucky to have you." After Mrs. Patterson left, Margot and Thomas adjusted to life with a baby. Jamie was demanding, waking every few hours to eat, requiring constant attention. But neither of them minded. Thomas proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Jamie when he fussed, changing nappies without complaint, singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby to sleep. One night, when Jamie was about a month old, Margot woke to find Thomas not in bed. She heard soft singing from the main room and went to investigate. Thomas sat in the rocking chair by the fire, Jamie cradled against his bare chest, both of them peaceful in the firelight. "He was fussing, and I did not want him to wake you," Thomas whispered when he saw her. "But he settled right down like this." Margot's heart swelled with love for this man who had found her broken in the snow and rebuilt her life piece by piece. "You are a wonderful father." "I am trying," he smiled at her. "I missed this the first time with Sarah. I do not intend to miss a moment now." She crossed to him, kissing his forehead, then Jamie's. "We are lucky to have you." "No, I am the lucky one." He looked up at her, the firelight catching in his eyes. "You could have stayed broken after what happened. Instead, you chose to live, to love again, to build something new. That takes more courage than I think you realize." Spring returned, bringing new life to the prairie. Jamie grew strong and healthy, his dark hair lightening to brown, his eyes settling into gray like his father's. Margot returned to ranch work gradually, carrying Jamie in a sling as she tended the garden, doing chores while he napped. In April, true to his word, Thomas hired carpenters from Linden to expand the house. They added 2 rooms, a proper bedroom for Thomas and Margot, and a nursery for Jamie. They also built a larger front porch where they could sit in the evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie. "This is what I envisioned when I came west," Thomas said one evening as they sat together on the new porch, Jamie asleep in Margot's arms. "A home, a family, a life built by my own hands. I thought I lost my chance at it when Sarah died. Thank you for giving me another chance." "We gave each other another chance," Margot corrected. She leaned against his shoulder, utterly content. "The blizzard took everything from me, but it also brought me here. To you, to this life. I cannot regret that, even though the cost was terrible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and beautiful and harsh. But they had each other, and they had Jamie, and they had built something strong enough to withstand whatever challenges came next. As years passed, their life settled into a rhythm of seasons and cycles. They had another child in 1880, a daughter they named Sarah Rose, honoring Thomas's first wife and giving Margot the daughter she had always wanted. Sarah was blonde where Jamie was dark, blue-eyed and laughing, a sunny presence in their household. Jamie grew into a serious boy, thoughtful and kind, with a fascination for learning that reminded Margot painfully of Samuel sometimes. Thomas noticed it too and made sure to bring books back from town, teaching Jamie to read and write and do figures. "He is smart," Thomas said proudly. "Maybe he will go to college someday, make something of himself." "He will be a rancher like his father," Margot predicted. "Look how he follows you everywhere, wanting to help with every chore." Both proved partially right. As Jamie grew, he showed aptitude for both book learning and ranch work, a combination that would serve him well. In 1882, they had a second son, Samuel Thomas, completing the circle of names and lives. Samuel was a wild child from the start, always into mischief, keeping them constantly busy. But he brought such joy into their lives that neither Margot nor Thomas could imagine the family without him. The ranch prospered. Thomas expanded the herd, bought more land from a neighboring homesteader heading back east, built a second barn. Margot kept chickens and sold eggs in town, started a vegetable garden that grew larger every year, became known for her preserves and pickles that she traded for goods they could not produce themselves. They made friends in the community, attended church socials, helped neighbors with barn raisings and harvest. Margot joined a quilting circle with other ranch wives, finding female friendship she had missed since leaving Ohio. Thomas joined the local cattlemen's association, earning respect for his honest dealing and fair prices. But their greatest joy remained each other and their growing family. Even as the children grew and life became busier, Thomas and Margot always made time for each other. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. They still made love with the passion and tenderness that had marked their early days. They still held hands walking from the house to the barn, still caught each other's eyes across the dinner table and smiled at private jokes. One evening in spring 1885, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch watching a storm approach from the west. Lightning flickered in the distance and thunder rumbled across the prairie. Margot felt Thomas tense beside her. "What is it?" she asked. "Just remembering," he said quietly. "Another spring storm years ago. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had not gone looking for you that day. If I had stayed home, assumed I imagined the smoke. But you did not." She took his hand. "You came and you found me and you saved me, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that choice. I am the grateful one." He pulled her close. "You gave me back my life, Margot. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to plan for the future. You gave me children and love and everything I thought I lost forever." The storm moved closer, and they went inside before the rain came. In their bedroom, with rain drumming on the roof and wind rattling the windows, they made love with the intensity of two people who understood how precious and fragile life could be. Jamie grew into a strong young man, graduating from the small school in Linden at 16 and deciding to stay on the ranch rather than pursue further education. "This is where I belong," he told his parents. "The land speaks to me the way it speaks to you, Pa. I want to build my life here." Thomas could not have been prouder. Together, father and son expanded the operation further, running 70 head of cattle and breaking more land for farming. The Monroe Ranch became known throughout the region for quality livestock and fair dealing. Sarah Rose grew into a beautiful young woman, artistic and romantic, who drew pictures of prairie scenes and wrote poetry in journals she kept hidden under her bed. She helped her mother with household tasks, but dreamed of seeing the world beyond Kansas. Margot encouraged her dreams while teaching her practical skills, knowing that whatever path Sarah chose, she would need to be capable and strong. Samuel Thomas proved to be the wild card, equally comfortable on horseback or with his nose in a book, talking about becoming a lawyer one day and a rancher the next. He kept them all on their toes with his schemes and adventures, but he had a good heart and fierce loyalty to family. In 1890, as Thomas approached 40 and Margot was 35, they stood together at the small cemetery visiting the graves they tended faithfully every spring. James's and Samuel's crosses had been replaced with proper headstones, as had Sarah's. Fresh flowers bloomed around each grave. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly. "Marrying me so quickly, building this life?" Margot looked at him, at the man who had saved her and loved her and given her a second chance at happiness. Gray was threading through his dark hair now, and lines had deepened around his eyes and mouth, but to her he was still the young cowboy who had ridden into her tragedy and offered hope. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for one single moment. I loved James and I loved Samuel, and I will always carry them with me. But you, Thomas Monroe, you gave me a life I never could have imagined. You showed me that broken things can be mended, that lost people can be found, that love does not run out even when you think it is all gone. How could I ever regret that?" He kissed her there in the cemetery, a long, sweet kiss that tasted of years and memories and promises kept. When they pulled apart, Margot saw tears on his cheeks. "What is it?" she asked, concerned. "Just grateful," he said. "The blizzard took everything from you, but it brought you to me, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift." "You have been worthy," she assured him. "Every single day, in every way that matters." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, just as they had done countless times over the years. At the house, their children were waiting, a typical evening scene of activity and noise. Jamie was working on tack repairs at the kitchen table. Sarah was helping with dinner preparations. Samuel was supposed to be doing homework, but was instead building some kind of contraption that would probably not work, but would be entertaining in the attempt. This was their life, built from tragedy and survival and stubborn determination, to find joy even in the hardest circumstances. It was not the life Margot had planned in Ohio all those years ago. It was better. That night, after the children were in bed, Thomas and Margot lay together in the comfortable darkness of their bedroom. The sounds of the prairie drifted through the open window, night birds calling, cattle settling, the eternal wind moving through grass. "Tell me about tomorrow," Margot said, a game they sometimes played. "Tomorrow we will wake with the sun," Thomas began, his voice drowsy and content. "You will make coffee while I do morning chores. Jamie will help me with the horses. Sarah will feed the chickens and gather eggs. Samuel will find some way to get dirty before breakfast. We will eat together, all of us, and plan the day's work. It will be ordinary and extraordinary all at once, like every day with you. And then," Margot prompted, "and then we will work because that is what ranchers do, but in the evening we will sit on the porch and watch the sun set. I will hold your hand, and you will lean against my shoulder, and we will count our blessings. All the ordinary, extraordinary blessings of this life we have built together. I like that plan." Margot snuggled closer, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you, Thomas Monroe." "I love you too, Margot Monroe. My wife, my partner, my second chance at everything good in this world." They drifted to sleep wrapped around each other, secure in the home they had built, the family they had created, the love that had sustained them through tragedy and triumph alike. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of seasons. Jamie married at 23, bringing home a sweet girl named Alice from a neighboring ranch. They built a small house on Monroe land and began their own family, giving Thomas and Margot their first grandchild in 1894, a boy they named Thomas James. Sarah surprised everyone by accepting a teaching position in Topeka at 21, pursuing her dreams of seeing more of the world while still maintaining close ties to home. She visited often, bringing stories of city life and books for her youngest brother. Samuel, true to his contradictory nature, decided to study law while also learning ranch management, determined to somehow do both. He attended college in Kansas City, but came home every summer to work the ranch, keeping one foot in each world. Thomas and Margot watched their children grow and leave, and sometimes return, the natural cycle of family life. They watched their ranch continue to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. They watched themselves grow older together, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of hard work, but their love remaining strong and true. In 1900, as the new century dawned, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. Friends and family came from throughout the region, filling the expanded house and spilling out onto the land. There was food and music and dancing, and as the sun set, Thomas pulled Margot aside for a private moment on their beloved porch. 20 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. It feels like yesterday and like forever all at once. We have built a good life, Margot said, looking out at the party, at their children and grandchildren, at the friends they had made, at the land they had tended. Better than good, extraordinary. "Do you remember what you told me that first night when I found you?" Thomas asked. "You said the blizzard took everything." "I remember. It took everything," Thomas agreed. "But somehow in the taking it also gave us everything, our life together, our children, all of this." He gestured at the ranch, the party, the wide Kansas sky turning pink and gold above them. "I do not understand the logic of it, but I am grateful for it." Margot turned to face him fully, this man who had found her broken and loved her whole again. "The logic is simple enough. You chose to ride out looking for someone in trouble. You chose kindness over convenience. You chose to see me as a person worth saving, not just another casualty of a hard land. Every good thing that came after started with those choices." "We both chose," Thomas corrected. "You chose to live when it would have been easier to give up. You chose to trust me, to build something new, to love again when your heart was shattered. Those were brave choices, Margot, the bravest I have ever seen." They kissed there on the porch while the party continued below, a kiss that held 20 years of shared life, of struggle and triumph, of ordinary days and extraordinary love. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Another 20 years?" Thomas asked. "At least," Margot promised. "Maybe 40 if we are lucky." They returned to the party, to their family and friends, to the life they had built from the ashes of tragedy. The music played on, and laughter rang out across the prairie, and the Monroe Ranch stood solid and strong against the vast Kansas sky. In the years that followed, they were granted those decades together. They watched their grandchildren grow, met great-grandchildren, saw their ranch pass into the capable hands of the next generation. They grew old together with grace and humor, their love deepening with each passing year. Thomas's hair turned completely white, and his body slowed, but his eyes remained sharp and his mind clear. Margot developed arthritis in her hands that made fine work difficult, but she adapted, finding new ways to contribute. They spent more time on the porch, less time working, but they were content. They had earned their rest. On a warm spring evening in 1918, when Thomas was approaching 70 and Margot was 63, they sat together watching yet another sunset. 3 generations of Monroes were scattered across the ranch now, in multiple houses, running a thriving operation. The world was at war, and change was sweeping across America, but here on the prairie some things remained constant. "Tell me again," Thomas said softly, "about the day I found you." Margot smiled. He asked her to tell the story sometimes, as if he needed to confirm it really happened, that they really had built this life from such a terrible beginning. "The wind came first," she began, the words familiar as prayer. "Then the snow, then the screaming silence that meant my husband and son were dead." She told the story, all the painful details, nothing held back. Thomas listened as he always did, holding her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. When she finished, describing how she had heard his horse approaching through the snow, his eyes were wet. "Best day of my life," he said. "Finding you. Even though the circumstances were terrible, finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Second best," Margot corrected. "First best was choosing to go looking in the first place. That was the moment that changed everything." Thomas laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "You always were better with words than me." "That is why you kept me around," she teased. "My superior vocabulary." "No," he said seriously. "I kept you around because you are the strongest, bravest, kindest person I have ever known. Because you make me better than I would be alone. Because I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." Margot felt tears slip down her cheeks, happy tears. "The blizzard took everything," she said. "But it led me to you. And you rebuilt my life, Thomas Monroe. You rebuilt me. I will never stop being grateful for that." "We rebuilt each other," Thomas said. "That is what love does. It takes broken pieces and makes something new. Something stronger than what came before because it has been tested and survived." They sat together as darkness fell, holding hands, counting stars as they emerged. Behind them, the house glowed with lamplight and life. Their family was safe and thriving. Their land was productive and paid for. Their love had endured every challenge and grown stronger for it. The blizzard had taken everything, but from that terrible loss had come a love story for the ages. 2 broken people who found each other in the snow and built a life that honored what they had lost while celebrating what they had found. It was a story of survival and second chances, of practical choices that became profound love, of the resilience of the human heart even in the harshest circumstances. As the years wound down and their bodies eventually failed, Thomas and Margot faced the end as they had faced everything else together. When Thomas died peacefully in his sleep at 72, with Margot beside him, his last words were "Thank you." Thank you for the life they had shared, for the family they had built, for the love that had sustained them through everything. Margot survived him by 3 years, long enough to see the ranch transition smoothly to Jamie and his sons, long enough to hold her newest great-great-grandchild. When she died at 66, it was with the same peace that had marked Thomas's passing. Her children buried her beside him, near the graves of James and Samuel and Sarah, closing the circle that had begun so long ago in the snow. On her headstone, Jamie had carved a special inscription, words his mother had spoken often about the man who saved her. "He found me broken in the blizzard and loved me whole again. and on Thomas's headstone, balancing hers. She taught me that love does not end, it transforms. The Monroe Ranch continued through the generations, a lasting testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, hope over despair, life over death. The story of Thomas and Margot became family legend, told and retold, the tale of how a cowboy found a wagon in the snow and changed not just one life but countless lives that came after. The blizzard took everything but her tears. The cowboy found her wagon and rebuilt her life. But more than that, much more, they rebuilt each other. They created a love that honored the past while embracing the future. They proved that even in the harshest circumstances, on the most unforgiving frontier, the human heart could not only survive but thrive. Their story was the story of the American West itself, a land where people came broken and bleeding, where survival required strength and courage, where loss was commonplace and happiness had to be fought for. But it was also a story of hope, of the possibility that even after terrible tragedy, life could surprise you with unexpected joy, that you could lose everything and still find reasons to keep living, that love could bloom even in the frozen heart of winter. The prairie where Thomas first found Margot eventually became cultivated farmland as Kansas grew and changed. The small cemetery where they rested together was preserved, though, protected by the family as sacred ground. Visitors sometimes came, drawn by the story, standing before the paired headstones and imagining that long-ago blizzard, that desperate woman, that compassionate cowboy. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the grass in just the right way, locals swore you could almost hear it, the sound of two people who loved each other so deeply that even death could not silence their story. The whisper of held hands, shared laughter, whispered promises kept across a lifetime. The blizzard took everything, but in the end, love proved stronger than tragedy. Two hearts found each other in the snow and refused to let go, building something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of loss. It was a small story in the vast sweep of history, just two people living quiet lives on the Kansas prairie. But it was also the biggest story there is, the eternal story that never gets old no matter how many times it is told, the story of love that saves us. The story of second chances and rebuilt lives. The story of choosing hope when every reason for hope seems lost. The story of Thomas and Margot Monroe, the cowboy and the woman from the blizzard, who taught everyone who knew them that no matter how much you lose, it is never too late to find love again. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the land in the 21st century, still told the story of how it all began. How a terrible blizzard killed two people, but ultimately brought together two others who might never have met otherwise. How tragedy and blessing were sometimes two sides of the same coin. How love could find you in the most unexpected places, at the darkest moments, if you kept your heart open to possibility. And on cold January nights, when the wind howled across the Kansas prairie and snow fell thick and fast, the family gathered close and warmed themselves with the knowledge that they were all here, because a young cowboy once rode out into a storm to look for trouble, and found instead the love of his life standing broken beside a ruined wagon. The blizzard took everything but her tears. A cowboy found her wagon and rebuilt her life, and together they created something that would last forever, a legacy of love that no winter could ever destroy.